Hello comrades, this video that I'm about to do is really going to be focused on the UK, which is where I am from and it is where I am currently living. I also kind of thought that I should do something a little bit more current, since many of my videos lately have mainly been covering history topics. However, this is not to say that I will not be including history and theory in this video, because I'm bound to. This is a communist channel after all. So, Jeremy Corbyn. What's been happening with him lately? Well, quite a lot actually. For those of you who may not have a great understanding of the British political system, Jeremy Corbyn was the leader of the Labour Party here in the UK for a while before he resigned. Well, I say that he resigned, but he was actually pushed out, and you could even say purged by the ruling class. In many ways, I would argue that Jeremy Corbyn has a lot in common with Bernie Sanders in the Democrat Party in political terms. The reason for this is because Jeremy Corbyn, although the ruling class over here likes to call him a Marxist or a communist, he's actually very far from it. Jeremy Corbyn is by no means a socialist in the slightest. He is a social democrat, just like Bernie Sanders over in the United States. This means that he is in no way a radical leftist like the ruling class loves to claim, because the policies he put forward were very moderate at best. All Jeremy Corbyn would do as a social democrat is basically lessen the harmful effects of capitalism while still preserving the capitalist system. These policies included scaling back the British military, renationalising certain concessions which were taken away by the British ruling class, like the railway system and the Royal Mail, and he also stood against the austerity measures that were placed onto the NHS and the welfare state. This doesn't really solve the internal contradictions within the system itself, like crises of overproduction, for example, because all this really does is just kind of buries it under the carpet. Straight away, this does not scream out radical socialist at all. Basically, for those who don't know, socialism is not a version of capitalism where you tax everything. For all of the right-wingers saying that Jeremy Corbyn is the socialist, so that makes him the big scary boogeyman, and for all of the liberals romanticising him, he is not a socialist. Socialism is where you abolish the private ownership over the means of production. So you abolish the capitalists from the production process, because all they do is extract surplus value from the workers to make a profit by raking in a large proportion of the value that is produced by workers. Basically, the capitalists, they don't need to be there. They're a hindrance. That is kind of the whole point of socialism. Socialism is essentially where you abolish private property, so means of production like workplaces, so not your toothbrush, okay? We're not going to break into your house, shoot your dog in the face and nick your television, alright? Although I do know a group of people who would do that. Let's just say that they work for the big bankers, even though I sure do love to replace the letter B with the letter W, and these lovely bunch of chaps are usually referred to as bailiffs. Socialism is where you take over the means of production. That means overthrowing the capitalists, so getting rid of them, taking over, and having the means of production being run by the workers via state ownership and worker-owned cooperatives. Capiche? Like I said, Jeremy Corbyn is a social democrat, and social democrats are not on the side of the proletariat at all. They actually do the ruling class a favour by pacifying the workers with concessions. But even so, social democrats are really not on the side of the proletariat, because I can use history to back myself up here. Back in 1919 in Germany, social democrats actually sided with fascists to murder the Spartacist communist revolutionaries, one of which included Rosa Luxemburg, who was a brilliant Marxist theorist as well as a great revolutionary who, might I add, actually split from the German Social Democratic Party before being murdered by them. Social Democrats in Germany even collaborated with the Nazis to oppose the communists during the Great Depression. It really does go to show that even Social Democrats will side with fascists in order to preserve the rule of capital from being destroyed by the working class. This is why I say that they cannot be trusted. Even the Labour Party has sided with the ruling class in carrying out imperialism. Many liberals who like to romanticise the Labour Party often praise Labour for handing the British working people the NHS and the welfare state after World War II, when they were elected into office after their victory in the 1945 general election against former Tory Prime Minister Winston Churchill. Now, I'm not saying this to knock the NHS down here, because I do think that the National Health Service is absolutely brilliant. The NHS, for those who don't know, is a universal healthcare system which is rightly appreciated and loved by workers here in the UK. But it is slowly being eroded away and privatised by the ruling class, because ever since the dissolution of the Soviet Union, a catastrophic event which demoralised communists throughout the First World, the bourgeoisie now feel as though they can kick the boot in. It is for this reason that we have been seeing a wave of criminal imperialist wars in the Southern Hemisphere, along with the super exploitation of third world countries, combined with very harsh austerity measures being put in place at home. This is all made worse by the fact that capitalism is endemic to crises. Basically, capitalists want to produce as much stuff as possible, sell as much of that stuff as possible, and pay the workers that they employ as little as possible to maximize profits. The workers, who are also the consumers of these products, they basically don't have enough money anymore, so they can't buy this stuff. A lot of this stuff then gets destroyed because nobody's buying it, and then businesses go bankrupt, people become unemployed, while the wages for those still lucky enough to be in work go down to maximize profits for the capitalists. It is a continuous cycle of there being more supply than there is demand. This is when the state steps in to bail out the capitalists. This is often why you will hear the old slogan of, well, we don't have enough money to pay for these vital services. It's basically a nicer way of saying fuck the disabled people, fuck the mentally ill people, and fuck the elderly people, because in times of crisis, vulnerable people like the disabled, the mentally ill, and the elderly, let's just say that they have it the worst. Even after the Second World War, when there was a strong revolutionary sentiment felt by workers in the midst of the devastation of the war, as well as the British soldiers who were returning home from the front becoming unnerved and also angry at the high chance of being left unemployed and homeless, just as the returning soldiers after the First World War were, it pricked up the eyebrows of the ruling class a little bit. After the war too, it is worth noting that the Soviet Union was also becoming very powerful, while also setting a great example for the workers of the world by facilitating the spread of socialism to Eastern Europe and Eastern Asia, as well as standing with the oppressed peoples of the colonized countries to help them in their struggles for national liberation. The USSR was essentially showing the proletariat of all countries that another world is possible. So in many ways, this is what made the Soviet Union become the shining beacon of inspiration to millions across the world, especially in the Southern Hemisphere, where the USSR was supporting many anti-colonial forces during the Cold War. So when it comes to making that decision of which side was good and which side was bad during the Cold War, you really have to look into it, because on one hand, you had the West, which was standing for the rights of the individual, but within a bourgeois context. And then you had the Socialist East, which stood for the proletariat of the world. But anyway, when you throw the Soviet Union becoming powerful after the Second World War into the mix, it starts to become quite easy to see why the post-war Labour government ended up giving us the NHS and the welfare state. This is because the ruling class essentially saw the NHS and the welfare state as a way to pacify the workers so that they could stay in power and preserve the rule of capital. It must be said that in order to pay for these concessions, the British ruling class used a lot of the wealth that they had robbed from the colonised countries. And while I'm on the subject, the next time you hear someone romanticising the Labour Party while also claiming to be a hardcore leftist, just remember that it was the Labour Party that supported the First World War. It was the Labour Party that was totally behind the systematic murder of communists in Malaya. It was the Labour Party that was totally behind the the British intervention in the Korean War. It was the Labour Party that was totally supportive of the formation of NATO as a way of deliberately threatening the Soviet Union and the Eastern Bloc. It was the Labour Party that was totally behind the British intervention in Yugoslavia, as well as the British intervention in Iraq, the British intervention in Afghanistan, and to top it all off, the Labour Party have a very, very long history of actually crushing trade union movements. But, as I say, the NHS has been marginalised by the British ruling class that much that it's literally got to the point where you can see the effects of it right now, in the middle of the coronavirus pandemic. This was why, when I saw people cheering for Boris Johnson when he became infected with COVID-19, I was just in pure disbelief. How fucking blind can people be, you know? As a politician in the British Parliament, Boris Johnson has consistently voted for and even sanctioned plenty of austerity policies against the NHS. Plus, he was also very reluctant to enforce a lockdown when advised by the World Health Organization to do so, because all he really cared about was the stock market, regardless of how much of an impact the coronavirus would have while spreading like wildfire through communities. Even recently, on the 11th of May 2020, Boris Johnson literally relaxed the lockdown measures over in England, and that's a very dangerous gamble with the lives of workers. So, yay capitalism, here's a smiley sticker for being the kid of the week. Even though I don't really believe in karma here, it's needless to say that when I found out about Boris Johnson going down with COVID-19, I genuinely thought that he bloody well deserved it, because I found it funny how the very same NHS staff who Boris Johnson marginalised basically saved his life. Now about Jeremy Corbyn, although he is a social democrat, I will say that he has got some character to him. I will put my hand on my heart and say that 1980s Jeremy Corbyn was way better than present-day Jeremy Corbyn. I say this because Mr. Corbyn has now actually retracted from a lot of his positions that he once had. These positions included opposing the European Union for being a giant imperialist organisation which serves to merely strengthen the financial and military power of the European bourgeoisie by being the free trade organisation that serves the interests of bankers and multinational corporations. As Comrade Lenin once correctly predicted over 100 years ago, when the conditions of the world as we know it were much different, Lenin pointed out, quote, "A United States of Europe is possible as an agreement between the European capitalists, but to what end? Only for the purpose of jointly suppressing socialism in Europe," close quote. Corbyn also was opposed to NATO. He was also very much against the apartheid regime in South Africa, and he even stood against British imperialism on a number of occasions, which included siding with the IRA in their struggle for the reunification of Ireland by ending the British colonial partition of their country. But unfortunately, it's perfectly clear that Jeremy Corbyn has now retracted from a lot of the previous positions which he once had, since he was very recently campaigning for the UK to remain within the imperialist bloc of the EU. But even so, Corbyn was still demonised by the British ruling class when he was the leader of the Labour Party. And this was made far more visible when a record number of young people went to the polling stations all across the UK during the general election in 2017 to vote for him, contributing to his majority win against Theresa May. He was even demonised and slandered by many of the members of his own party, which just goes to show how loyal the Labour Party really is to imperialism. He's been demonised and purged because he ever so slightly criticised the British establishment and what it stands for. This just goes to show how very right-wing the UK really is. Even if Jeremy Corbyn did become the Prime Minister, Britain would still be a capitalist country, so there will definitely still be internal contradictions like overproduction, and the UK will still carry on being a legitimate participant in global imperialism by owning much of the world's wealth, exploiting cheap labour in third world countries, digging minerals and oil in poorer countries at very low prices, and also dominating the global markets. However, for someone as moderate as a social democrat to be painted as a communist revolutionary in the likes of Vladimir Lenin, it would really make you think to yourself, if the bourgeoisie are demonizing and purging social democrats, not only does it mean that we should not be afraid of showing people that we are communists and we stand for the liberation of the proletariat via the total destruction of capitalism, but it also shows that workers now are also possibly facing a new kind of struggle against capital. But most of all, it shows everyone that dialectical materialism is on our side here, because this has shown us that socialism and the liberation of the proletariat cannot and will not be achieved via the ballot box. Such a radical change by taking the means of production away from the capitalists, who currently have an entire system set up to benefit them, which includes the elections, is not something that can simply be voted for. It requires an understanding of dialectics, an in-depth understanding of the nature of class politics. It requires organisation, and I don't mean a loosely organised club full of people who wear the party's badge one day and the next just do their own thing. No, I'm talking about an extremely disciplined organisation, almost like an army. A disorganised army with disorganised commanders will never win a battle, let alone win a war. We can't exactly liberate the proletariat by passing a reform to take away the workplaces from the capitalists, can we? The bourgeoisie are not just going to give up their power completely on the spot. They'll more than likely fight back, which is why, even though pacifists have great intentions, I must say that I very strongly disagree with them. The struggle to liberate the proletariat is a struggle which is bound to be incredibly violent. History has even shown us that, with the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia, which was followed by a civil war, or the Vietnamese people's struggle for national liberation as classic examples. It all boils down to this: almost no revolutionary process is clean and without blood. It is what you must be prepared for when trying to change society to better suit the working class. There are class interests involved. The class struggle is real, and hey-ho, classes can and do actually fight violently for their rights. So the last thing I want to see in the comment section is a huge wave of Gandhi bullshit, because historical evidence has actually shown us that it was actually the heroic actions of revolutionaries who were on the streets literally fighting against the British colonial forces that paved the way for India's independence. In Chile, they tried to establish socialism through reforms there, but because it pricked a small hole in the bubble of neoliberalism, it all led to the democratically elected Salvador Allende being overthrown by the fascist dictator Augusto Pinochet. Pinochet also had full support from the United States, even when he had football stadiums converted into concentration camps for supporters of the democratically elected government of Allende. Even in Venezuela, where there is an elected socialist party in government, both Hugo Chavez and Nicolas Maduro have faced attempted coups d'etats which were all backed by the United States, with some of these coups being quite violent too. So, what's the message in all of this? Well, the message here is that revolution is not a dinner party. Had to quote Mao there, sorry. But revolution is not a conference. Revolution is not an election to pass a reform. Revolution means overthrowing a class system and beginning a total restructure of society, violently if necessary. That is revolution. It's not something that requires a seat in parliament or an approval from the Queen. It is something that requires disciplined organisation and consistent planning to win the hearts of the masses, while also staying connected with them. To say that the ills of capitalist society can be solved with a mere vote for a moderate social democratic candidate is a long shot in itself. But to see a moderate social democratic candidate within the British Parliament being demonised, belittled, purged from his own party, along with his supporters within his own political party being antagonised, just goes to show that if we are to establish socialism, we have got to start a fight. We have to organise. To quote a lyric from a rap song, "No time to wait for heroes, this starts with you and I."